All right, most reps are simply terrified of the phone. Let's call a spade a spade. Cold calling feels uncomfortable for most people and it feels like something that just doesn't work anymore. But the reality is it does work, and it actually works better than ever if you know how to do it right. My name's Connor Murray. I've spent the last 7 years in enterprise software sales at 2 market-leading tech companies. I've made over 50,000 cold calls myself, and I've coached hundreds of SDRs and AEs across a variety of different industries to cold call effectively from zero. So this is not theory, it's real-world, battle-tested strategy that I've seen work for many different people. So in this video, I'm giving you the full system that I use. I call it the value statement framework, the exact cold call framework I teach to top performing reps with scripts, openers, objection handling, and how to put it all together in a way that's easy to implement and that you can do at scale. So here's what we're going to cover in the video. First, why does cold calling still work even today, and how are top reps using it to crush quota? Then we'll dive into the mindset shift you need to make in order to start to gamify cold calling and make it a process you look forward to, followed by the full value statement framework. I'm going to break it down step by step, which is the exact structure I use to book meetings. And then we'll also walk through a variety of different cold call openers that work, how to handle objections without sounding salesy, and then how to personalize, keyword personalize, all of this at scale. And then finally, we'll build your daily call engine. We'll discuss ways to review and improve your calls on the fly, which is a really important and overlooked topic. And then I'll break down the only tech you actually need in order to implement all of this. So let's get into it. All right, so why does cold calling still win despite everything that's being said out there? Yes, a lot has changed in the last few years, particularly around AI, automation. It's just making things easier than ever to create and blast out personalized emails and LinkedIn messages at scale. It's all you see LinkedIn sales gurus talking about these days. But the phone is still the #1 tool when it comes to cutting through the noise and taking actual control over pipeline generation. And what you'll notice is that elite sales reps and elite sales leaders that are top performers are still primarily emphasizing the phones. So what's also different is that fewer people than ever are cold calling. It's always been low, but it's never been quite this low. I am around enterprise AEs all the time, coaching them. People have been doing this literally 7 to 10 years plus, and almost none of them are making cold calls, most at all, or very least consistently, almost nobody. Everyone prefers to hide behind the comfort of cold email and in-mail, and that's why cold calling is such a huge opportunity. People are not getting as many cold calls as you think, these prospects, and almost none are receiving them in the framework, the value statement framework that I'm going to show you in this video. So if you're ever in doubt about the value of cold calling, just know cold calling is something that, I don't know, I would estimate less than 10% of the population is actually capable of doing. It's probably closer to like 2%. And just think about all the talented and highly intelligent people in the world. Almost none of them can cold call, either because they don't know how, that's most people, or even the ones who do simply are not willing to because they don't know how to make the process enjoyable or do it in a consistent way for themselves. So this is why we get paid the big bucks, and this alone should eliminate any doubt that cold calling is valuable. As a general rule of thumb, things that are scarce are generally valuable, whether it's in the investing world, if you're into that, like real estate, Bitcoin, gold, whatever floats your boat, not getting into that, but whatever you're into, sales reps that know how to cold call are scarce and therefore valuable. And a big reason why cold calling is still so effective is the speed to trust that can be achieved solely on the phone. A lot of buyers are simply sick of all the automated email blasts. I get them all the time. Sales reps in their inbox, and they just won't take meetings through that channel. I don't take meetings through email anymore at all because I just get so many of them and I don't know who's credible and who's not. But they still answer the phones, and on the phone you can build instant credibility through your tone and through your conviction, which is something that can't be replicated over email. And this is the biggest reason why cold calling is still king. It's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. And generally, from my experience, you have about 30 seconds to really capture their attention through not just your words, but your tone and your conviction, which is why I designed the value statement framework the way I did, and it's what we're going to cover later in this video. And then lastly, one big gripe a lot of people have with cold calling is they don't think it's scalable. Like email, you can send out hundreds of emails easily, which this is true if you're doing cold calling the traditional way, which is doing research in between every cold call, trying to hyper-personalize it, spend 5 minutes in between calls, preparing so that you feel prepared for the cold call. But cold calling is very scalable if you systematize your work through a process I call coiling the spring, which we'll also cover throughout the video, and we'll go much more in depth on. But in short, you have your targeted lists and scripts built out in advance, ready to go, so you can deliver the same value statement to a large list of leads without needing to do 5 minutes of research in between to feel prepared for the call. And then you need a consistent schedule and process you adhere to each week. So hopefully I have you bought into why cold calling is valuable. And now I want to get into the key cold calling mindset shift that you need to make in order to become a killer on the phone. This is the exact mindset shift I made when I started out as an SDR, being, for those of you that don't know, I was the slowest performer in my start group, despite showing up early, working late. I read all the books. I was the last one on my SDR team to book a meeting over the phone. I pretty much had to beg a guy to do it. So I went from that to becoming the #1 SDR in my cohort of over 100 people, largely due to cold calling. And this was the mindset shift that did it. And what happened was shifting the internal dialogue in my head every time I clicked dial from being don't pick up, don't pick up, don't pick up, to please pick up, please pick up, please pick up. And I want to talk about how I did that because I know that's probably how a lot of you feel right now. So the reason there's that initial dialogue, don't pick up, and people are so fearful and anxious, at least for me, it was because every time I clicked dial, I didn't have a consistent framework in place. I didn't know what was going to happen. After the prospect said hello, there were a million different possible outcomes, and I knew I probably wasn't prepared. So a countdown essentially started in my head as to when I was either going to get blown off the call or I was going to make a fool of myself. And really every dial was just a hope that I didn't embarrass myself and therefore face rejection. At least that's how I felt for a long time. So what changed was I ultimately decided to take more control over the cold call process using the value statement framework so that I knew exactly what I was going to do when the prospect said hello. I was going to go down swinging, so I designed the scripts to give myself a chance of booking the meeting, and therefore the internal dialogue in my head shifted from fearing rejection to associating each answer with an opportunity to make money. And this is how I did it. Every pickup now gave me a non-zero probability that I would set a meeting and therefore generate an opportunity and make money. So what I started to literally do, I put an example here, I'll cover it in a sec, was reverse engineer the value of a meeting and the value of a dial. So here's a pretty realistic example of what this can look like for an SDR. To some of you, this may seem low or high, and I get there's nuances for different people depending where you work. That's not important here. What's important is to just understand the thought exercise. So in this example, if you're an SDR and you book 30 meetings in a quarter, that's like 10 meetings per month, and you generate on average about 10 opportunities from those meetings, that can put you in a spot, depending on your OTE, where you're earning like a 10K or so quarterly bonus. And again, some of you, this might seem low or high. That's not the main point here. All of you can do this exercise. But from there, you can take that number, 10K, and divide it by the 30 meetings you set. And now you've just determined that every meeting that you set is worth approximately $333, which was wild to me, especially as a young SDR. I was like, okay, how do I get as many people as possible live on the phone now so that I can deliver a value statement that gives me a non-zero probability of earning $333? And then even from there, let's say you make an average of 100 dials on a daily basis. Now literally every time I clicked dial, it was worth $3.33, which sounds low, but it was certainly enough for me to click the dial button as many times as possible. So this is the best way I know how to motivate myself as a cold caller, is to play a game you can actually win, which is measuring inputs like call volume, answer rate, and set rate, and doing what you can to increase each of those percentages and therefore increase the value of each dial you make in each meeting. This is my preferred method of motivation, which is it's very different than a lot of the rah motivation out there. I don't want to call out any names, but there's a lot of sales guys on YouTube wearing tight shirts that just love to scream at people, which I have nothing against, but that can motivate you for a morning or a day, but it's not something that's going to consistently get you up in the morning to make more dials when you're not feeling it. This will. So, and then the last point I also want to make on this topic too is that a lot of people struggle with motivation because they feel like they're interrupting or they're bothering people. And what I tell people is you're offering value. You're offering yourself as a valuable resource to the prospect. Moving forward, your company and your resources for key business priorities that they care about, which in a lot of cases could ultimately lead to a promotion and a pay raise for the prospect if they take a meeting with you and a project gets started and it's successfully implemented. That means big money and big promotions for these people oftentimes. So every time you feel like you're bothering people, the problem is it comes across in your tone and your voice. You have this passive upward inflecting tone and you use passive language like, would you maybe be interested in meeting next week if you have time, rather than a stronger, more assumptive downward inflecting tone, which we're going to talk about. So the other point on this too is that they're an adult. Like, people know what happens when they click the green button on their phone, they see their phone dialing. They can hang up at any point if they want, so you don't need to feel like you're interrupting or that you need to ask their permission for you to keep talking. Just quickly get into confidently telling them who you are, why you're calling, and what you want, and their head will very quickly shift the focus from, this is a cold call, how'd they get my number, to what you're saying if you're actually doing it right and you sound confident and convicted. So from here, I want to get into the value statement framework and how to actually do this. And this takes us to the value statement framework, which I know looks like a lot on the screen right here, but I promise you it's actually very simple once I break it down. And this is what all of this led me to creating. So I'm going to be referencing this throughout the video. And by the way, if you want much more hands-on guidance for how to implement, if any of this stuff is resonating, there's a link in the description to the Cold Call Mastery course community I created where I lead the live coaching. I won't labor on that. I'll talk about it later. But what you have here is a repeatable structure that you can use so that, like I was saying earlier, you know what to do when the prospect says hello. Is a short, quick summary before I get into it. It starts with the opening, which I call an assumptive formality, which I'm going to go into next here on how to actually deliver one so that you can take control of the call and deliver what I call a value statement, which is telling them who you are, why you're calling, what you want. Once you physically get that out, if you physically say it, now there's only 3 possible outcomes that you need to be prepared for, and really just one. Either, in a lot of cases, when you get good at it, a lot of people, because they're busy and they don't want to talk on the phone for 10 minutes right now, they're like, sure, you know what? Yeah, next week works on Wednesday, maybe Thursday in the afternoon, in which case you book the meeting. And you can do a little more qualifying. It's not like you just throw away the phone and say, great, see you Thursday, because this is going to impact show rates. But you can and should do more qualifying, but you want to get that commitment first. And if they're signaling to you that they're not busy, they're not in a rush, and they do have some time to talk and are maybe even asking you some questions, you can use that as an opportunity to further qualify. But in general, it's not that hard of an outcome to prepare for. Just book the meeting, send a strong invite. So that's one outcome. The other is you get a resounding no, which is something like being hung up on, you're a scammer, take me off your list, never call me again, click. They don't even give you the chance to respond, which this is always going to happen no matter how good your value statement is. It happens to me all the time to this day. You just got to price this in. Again, this is why we make the big bucks. We're willing to deal with this. We're willing to laugh it off and view it as a numbers game, not as something personal. So again, you don't really need to be prepared because there's nothing you can do. So just make your next dial. So 2 of the 3 outcomes, pretty self-explanatory. You take control, who, why, what. They either agree, resounding no. And otherwise, the only other outcome you should spend most of your time preparing for are the most common objections you tend to face or clarifying questions. I kind of put them both in the same category. So what are the most common ones? You want to eventually niche out and build out responses for all of them, but it can sound like, we already work with XYZ vendor. I'm not the right person. Talk to Jim in IT. So what do you all do again? Or is this a cold call? Hey, we're too busy right now. It's not a priority. Circle back closer later to the end of the year. Or insert common response. And I'm getting into the acronym game. There's 2 layers of responses. It's so simple. The first layer I call ARA. We're going to cover this in depth, but it's acknowledge, reassert, and advance. In other words, double down, sell the time, sell the meeting. The second line of defense, ACE, is ask, clarify, expand. So I'm going to be referencing this. We're going to break this down, and I want to just so I really hammer it home and it's crystal clear. If this resonates with you, this is my style of cold calling, step by step. The value statement framework is designed with the following principles in mind. It's one, the burden of proof is on us as the cold caller to deliver value first. This is very different than a lot of commonly taught sales enablement training out there, that you want to lead off with permission and then make an observation and an open-ended question. In my opinion, we have to make our point very quickly. We interrupted a busy working professional's day. They're probably in a meeting, going into a meeting, working on something. The burden of proof is on us to deliver value first, so therefore we will be taking control and doing most, if not all of the talking for about the first 30 to 45 seconds of the call. And what we're going to be saying in those 30 to 45 seconds are answers to these three key questions: who we are, why we're calling them specifically, which is essentially what priorities and challenges we solve and how we solve them, and then what we want, which is time on their calendar. I want to take control, go down swinging, give myself a shot on net, because we're focused on selling time. We're selling the meeting. We don't need to sell the entire value proposition of our solution on a cold call. Don't let any of these people tell you, oh, cold calling is a relationship building exercise. That sounds good in a LinkedIn post, but that's not how it works in the real world. We're interrupting busy working professionals. Our goal is to get a meeting set on the calendar with a high value persona, so that is the opportunity, and that will be the place that we go more in depth and bring a strong point of view and convince them and motivate them that this is a project worth looking into. Otherwise, it almost comes off as a little disrespectful if you just, hey, how you doing today? You have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? Great. A lot of CFOs we work with and that I talk to are this. What does that look like for you? And in their head, they're already thinking, dude, I have a meeting in 3 minutes. I don't want to hang up on you yet because I don't want to be rude, but I'm going to try and start signaling to you I don't have time to talk for 5 to 10 minutes right now. And the other thing is, if you don't get right into it, it ends up taking 5 minutes for you to get these pieces of information out: who you are, why you're calling, and what you want. And it comes through having to battle a defensive tone. So you're not delivering your value proposition in the way that you want it or that you're capable of delivering it. So I want to do this out of the gate and essentially position myself as a valuable resource to them moving forward in key business areas that we care about, and essentially signal, hey, here's who I am, what I do, and why I'm reaching out to you and what I want. We can talk about this now if you want, but I also understand you're a busy working professional and we can do this later this week at any of these times if you want. That's not how I'm saying it, but that's essentially the vibe I'm giving off. Other stated goals of the value statement framework, again, designed to give us control over the cold call process and for you to be prepared at every layer. Once you deliver the value statement, you have those three possible outcomes and you can be prepared for what's coming next. It's designed for you to be targeted at scale. As you'll see, one value statement should work for a large list of leads. It can work for 100 people in a row and be a good targeted script so that you don't need to do research in between every single cold call. It's also designed, as I've been saying, to take key nuances into cold calling into account, like that we're generally interrupting a busy working professional, and now is probably not the best time to start doing open-ended discovery when they barely know who we are yet. And then it's designed to give you multiple shots on net or probabilities of booking the meeting. Again, if every meeting's worth $333 or $275 or $482, I want to be giving myself probabilities that they actually say yes to a meeting. So looking at it again, it starts up here when the prospect says hello with an assumptive formality. This is what I call this is what I refer to as my cold call opening. So I want to go into how to kick this process off with an assumptive formality. So remember one of the key stated goals. It's to maintain control and limit variance. Essentially, our goal is to get a quick formality or response from the prospect and then get right into, as quickly as possible, our value statement by saying something like, good, thanks. Yeah, the reason I'm calling is, or I'm just reaching out because, and the key to doing this is a downward inflection. And I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of what a downward inflection looks like versus an upward inflection. They're not exact words to say, it's how you say it. So to this day, I just say, how are you? Hey Jim, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company, how are you? Or, hey Jim, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company, how have you been? Or you can even just say, hey Jim, how are you? And most of the responses I get are, good, how are you? They can sound confused. They can even sound hesitant or like they're pushing back, but whatever they give me, where'd you say, where'd you calling from? Yeah, I'm calling from XYZ company. I'm just reaching out because, or the reason I'm calling is, and I, boom, as quickly as possible, start delivering my value statement of who I am, why I'm calling, what I want, because it gets their head to shift from, is this a cold call? How'd they get my number? Is my number out there in a database or something? I'm busy right now. To now they're listening to my confident, concise, and convicted value statement. So even that one where it's just like, hey Jim, how are you? This is how normal people talk to each other. Most people, if you just do it right and don't view it as a cold call in your head, like you're just calling someone to offer yourself as a resource, most people just say, good, how are you? Who is this or what is this regarding? And then you just say, yeah, I'm just reaching out. My name's Connor Murray. I'm calling from XYZ company. I'm calling you because blank, blank, and blank, and you just get into the value statement. My goal here is to eliminate what I call variance. So common techniques that inadvertently create variance are things where you pause and give them a chance to respond before you start getting into your value statement. So it's little things. I've listened to so many cold calls, especially during my time as an SDR manager, where a lot of people will lead off saying, they'll confirm whether they're speaking to the right person. Hi, am I speaking with John Smith? And they pause, and it just creates a moment for them to be like, oh, so they don't know me. A lot of it's subconscious. So they don't know me. I wasn't expecting this call. If you got a call, think about if I got a call and it was like, hi, am I speaking with Connor Murray? I know you're not a friend. I know you're probably not a colleague. And in my head, I'm like, did I forget to pay some bill or return something? Like, am I in trouble right now? And it causes that defensive tone inadvertently. Other things like asking for permission if you don't do it the right way. This is an unnecessary one I see a lot. Hey, did I catch you at a bad time here? And you pause. 95% of the time from my experience, their answer is, yeah, I'm busy. Like, what is this regarding? Why would you ask a question that sets yourself up to be told they're busy? Like, we're gonna skip this. A lot of this can be improved just by eliminating this stuff or just doing too much in general. Hey, you're gonna hate me. This is a cold call. I'm sure you hate cold calls, but do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? You're giving too many thoughts or chances for variance or thoughts to start swirling in their head where they can pull the call away from what you ultimately want to kick off by delivering is your value statement. Think of it, opener, boom, I want to get to this as quickly as possible. Like on this last slide here, let me go back for a sec. Like this arrow is important. The assumptive formality is meant to just get me right to this as quickly as possible because once I deliver it, now I'm in the funnel. Now it's one of these three outcomes and I can have a non-zero probability of booking a meeting. So the openers, it can even be permission-based. Look, I make fun, I poke fun at the permission-based a lot, but I have heard people sound money using it. And to those people, but they don't even realize it, they're using it as an assumptive formality. So they'll say like, hey Jim, it's Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. Do you have just 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling and then you can decide whether you want to continue the conversation? It's not what I would use, and I'm probably not that good at it because I don't use it that much, but a lot of people, they use the permission-based opener, they don't even realize it as an assumptive formality. The person's just like, oh, yeah, sure. And if you're just getting a lot of yeah, sure's, then you're achieving the objective. Just remember the objective is to get into who, why, what as quickly as possible. So now let's get into what that who, why, what actually looks like. So the value statement's meant to be a repeatable framework where again, you answer 3 questions. You're ideally targeting about 30 to 35 seconds, which is who you are, why you're calling, and what you want. The who you are is essentially, you keep it simple. You tell them your name, the company you work for, and your title and role. There's ways to tweak it to make it sound more specific. Like if you're calling someone in the retail industry, you can say you're part of the strategic retail team, but you don't need to overthink it. This is the most important part and the part that requires the most testing to really nail it, which is why you're calling them, which is what priorities and pain points do you solve for them and how you solve them. You don't have to get too in the weeds. In fact, I don't recommend it. It's actually a lot of times better to stay broad so that you don't pigeonhole yourself into one specific topic, but then you state what you want, which is time on their calendar. It might sound like a mouthful, but it's actually a very repeatable process. And I've showed you an example here of, let's say you sell HR software and you're calling an HR, you have a list of people who are all HR leaders that work in the retail industry specifically. I've bolded how in the purple here, what you change depending on the title and the industry or any other information and ways you segment them, but it's the same framework every single time. So as you'll see, assumptive formality. Hey Jim, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How you doing? Good, yeah. I'm just reaching out because I'm part of the workforce applications team here that works on priorities mainly related to talent planning, labor cost optimization, and workforce scheduling, usually by working with HR teams to centralize workforce data and then surface insights through the use of AI that can really help improve staffing efficiency. So I know that's high level, but I'll be your main point of contact here for any priorities you do have in these areas going forward, workforce planning initiatives, headcount forecasting, anything like that. Now you have two options here. You can either pause like I've written out and kind of get their response to that before going for the meeting, or you can just go right into it and say, yeah, and I know I kind of called you out of the blue here too, so I was actually more looking to set some time later this week just to introduce you to our team and get aligned with your priorities going forward. How's your calendar look on Thursday or Friday this week? So what you'll notice here, the tone is really important. You have to have that honed down. The first time you create one of these value statements, you're gonna sound red, and you have to identify areas where you raise your tone, you lower it, where you pause. It's even okay to add in a few natural ums and ahs so it doesn't sound like you're reading. But notice the downward inflection. The way I'm saying it is I'm expecting this meeting to happen. I'm not asking if they're interested or if this is worth a chat. I told them, here's who I am. I'm part of the workforce applications team that works on, and you name priorities. This is part of the planning and the coiling the spring process we're gonna cover. I named priorities that an HR leader in retail is likely thinking about on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. And then I told them at a high level confidently how we do it. I acknowledged that it was high level. That's not mandatory, but you can add in a little flavor. Like, I know that's high level, but then you position yourself as a valuable resource to them going forward. It's low pressure. And a lot of people, you can lead off with a question like, curious which of these are top of mind for you going into FY25 if you really want. But I personally like to just end with a statement and kind of get their response to that. You could even say, so I just wanted to reach out and make sure I properly introduced myself. You just get their response to that. You truly make a statement. Or what I teach new reps is just go straight for the meeting so that you give yourself that probability, the who you are, why you're calling, what you want. The other beauty of this is because we took the time to make a script targeted for HR leaders in retail, you could probably add 500, 1,000 HR leaders in your territory that work in retail, if you have that many, and you can say the same thing to them that's been targeted for their persona in that industry, and it's probably gonna be a valuable script and relevant script for them without needing to do research in between calls. Now, when you get someone live, because lives are hard to come by, that's when I might have LinkedIn Sales Nav pulled up or something and go, like search them and pull it up while I'm delivering this so that I can reference some additional information that I know about them when we start having some expected back and forth. But just to make it crystal clear, here's the assumptive formality. As quickly as possible, I didn't give them a chance to start asking questions. I took control. I told them who I was, why I was reaching out to them specifically, and then stated what I want. This is a good base framework that you can start with. You're gonna wanna optimize it based on your value proposition, the types of personas you reach out to, but it's gonna give you, if you haven't tried this, I promise you, start trying it and you're just gonna hear, it's gonna feel way better on the calls and you're gonna deal with way fewer defensive tones from prospects because now they understand who you are, the intent, they know it's within their control. They can either take the meeting or not. And the better you get at the value statement, the more people that will just say yes right out of the gate. So I'm gonna show you a lot more examples later in this video of how you can tweak this depending on the persona you're reaching out to, but a lot of you are probably thinking, what if they say no or they give you an objection? Well, that's where we're in the funnel. This is the beauty of the framework. One, the value statement's designed to proactively prevent a lot of common objections, like where'd you say you were calling from? How'd you get my number? Now they're more focused on what you're saying. They're not asking questions about who you are or what you do. Their objection's gonna be around the areas, the priorities that you named that were relevant, the pain points you solved, things like that. So now, if we get one of these common objections, if they didn't agree, they didn't give us a resounding no. A lot of people, they actually find value in your value statement. They're just hardwired not to give out their time so easily, and they come up with an objection, and if we're prepared for the most common ones, we can give ourselves, again, the best probability or shot on net of booking the meeting. So the simplest way I can break down objection handling, we're gonna use an example on this slide. We already have a solution in place for this. It's one of the most common universal objections no matter what industry you work in. And again, there's two layers of defense. The first layer, ARA, which is acknowledge, reassert, in advance. So this is what it can sound like. If they say, I delivered that value statement, hey, thanks for reaching out, but we already have a solution in place. I don't think it makes sense to meet. Instead of saying, how's that solution going for you? Do you have a renewal coming up soon? And trying to overcome the objection by convincing them that they should consider a different solution. You're not going to do that on a cold call, or at least your odds are much lower than if you just say something like, got it, yeah, that's actually why I was reaching out. We work with customers of ABC competitor all the time, so if there's ever a fit, we can move ahead, but I still think it at least makes sense to briefly introduce you to our team, because we'll be the main ones supporting you for any future priorities you have in any of these areas going forward. So do you have any availability later this week on Thursday or Friday? So doubled down and sold the time. That's essentially what I did. I acknowledged their concern, reasserted that it made sense to meet anyway, and then advanced and went for an assumptive meeting again, a non-zero probability of booking the meeting. You will be surprised at how many people will agree because they actually were interested in what you said. Their knee-jerk reaction is to give you an objection, but when you double down confidently and almost meet them at the end of the sentence, you don't interrupt them, but you're just unfazed. You're like, got it, yeah, that's actually why I was reaching out. They're like, oh, okay. Subconscious again, but they're like, maybe this is someone worth taking a meeting with. Now, it's going to work a decent percentage of the time, but still the majority of the time, they're going to give you another objection. Like, let's say I said that and they're like, I get it. I have your name. I just really don't think it makes sense. We just implemented this. Our contract's not up for 2 or 3 years. So I really don't see why it would make sense to me. Now is when you can use the opportunity to ask more of an open-ended question and start doing a bit of that discovery that sales enablement trainers and LinkedIn sales influencers love to talk about on cold calls. But here's what's happened at this point. You took control. The burden of proof is on you. You delivered value first. You told them who you were, why you're calling, what you want. You doubled down. You sold the time. You're probably 60 to 90 seconds into the call at this point. They haven't hung up on you. So now they are signaling that they have time to talk to you and are actually engaging with you, and you have earned the right to now start asking more open-ended questions and having a bit more of a discussion rather than just giving them a high-level value prop and selling time. So what's happened here at this point, they're probably decently interested in what you've said if they're still engaging with you. They're just still finding reason. They're not going to go down. They're not going to give out their time so easily. So what you need to do is build more credibility for yourself and show that you're not just spraying a pitch here and that you actually are an expert in your space. This is what's harder for newer people. It takes time to build this out, but you can build out high value questions for yourself using this framework. Ask, clarify, expand. It's a way to, you'll see here. So if that's what happened, double down, sold the time. I really don't think it makes sense to meet. We have a contract renewal. It's not up for 3 years. So I would say something like, yeah, got it. So when you say you have ABC solution in place, does that also support X, Y, and Z processes? And the reason I ask is, it's just because normally when we work with customers of ABC competitor, it's because they're using it for blank, but then they're also using vendor A for blank, vendor B, vendor C. And there's usually a big opportunity to consolidate tooling and deliver a pretty meaningful ROI in the process, which is something we can look at it at a high level and what we work on with customers all the time. So you're not just asking, when you say you're using ABC solution, what is that for? And just leaving it at that. You're aiming to build credibility here. The key line is the reason I ask is, or I'm just asking because the only reason I ask, and so you ask the question, you clarify why you're asking and expand upon it. So here's the question, here's why I'm asking, it's what we see a lot, and here's what we actually help customers similar to you on. Now there's a lot of people who will start to engage a lot more positively with you and be, oh, so when you say ROI, I mean, how in-depth is that, or how quickly could you turn that around? And now this is where it's gonna start to open up and change depending on where you work. But now you've shown them you're not just spraying and praying, and you're just trying to increase the probability in their mind that they decide, they do the mental internal math that, maybe if I do spend 15 to 30 minutes of time with this person, I can either learn something that's valuable or potentially even get something that could make me look good in the eyes of my boss or my leadership. That's what we're going for here. So we do want to keep pulling it back to the meeting. I don't think you want to be doing this for 10, 15 minutes on a cold call. I'd rather be doing that on a discovery call. The goal is to just ask a few questions. You give them a little more credibility. You use the ACE framework, ask, clarify, expand, and then you keep pulling it back to, and by the way, this is why I wanted to set up the call, especially if you're an SDR, this is why I want to introduce you to my senior counterpart or the rest of our team so that we can actually go more in detail on this. So does XYZ date work? So this is a repeatable framework. These are stuff you can have prepared in advance. First layer is double down and sell the time. Second layer, ask, clarify, expand, and then keep pulling it back to time. So you can do this over and over and over again. And then eventually it's like, if it's been 10, 15 minutes, at some point you've lost the call. But this is how you can be prepared for when they say hello, assumptive formality, who you are, why you're calling, what you want. That's your first shot on net. This is your second shot on net. And this can be your third, fourth, fifth shot on net if it ends up going that far. So just breaking this down a little further, I know there's a lot on the screen here. You can maybe pause it if you want. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but each step, acknowledge their concern. Got it. That's actually why I was reaching out. You're showing that you're validating their concern without resistance. You're being unfazed and essentially neutralizing it. You're not getting defensive or stumbling over your words. Even a 1-2 second pause can be all the difference. You're then reasserting, got it, yeah, that's actually why I was reaching out. We work with customers of ABC all the time, so if there's ever a fit, we can move ahead, yada, yada, yada. That's reasserting, and then you're advancing to give yourself the assumptive shot on net. Go for the meeting again. Now, if they still push back on that, you can use this framework to open the conversation up a bit and start doing a little bit of that qualifying and discovery, where you're asking, clarifying, and expanding. When you say you already have ABC solution in place, does that also support X, Y, and or Z processes? The reason I ask is because normally when we work with customers of ABC competitor, here's how, and then tell them at a high level, there's usually a big opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. So if you're doing that, you're now going through the value statement funnel. This maybe looked like a lot towards the beginning of the video, but hopefully it's simple and you can understand it now, is that the goal at the opening is to get an assumptive formality so that you can enter the funnel here, deliver who, why, what. Now there's only 3 possible outcomes. This is the one you need to be the most prepared for. You have the most common objections. Usually the top 4 to 5 objections account for like 80% of the objections, but you do always want to be building out responses for more niche objections. And you can use this repeatable framework to be prepared for the most common objections and give yourself the best chance of booking the meeting. So that's the framework. Now the next question is, how can we enter this funnel as many times as possible? How can we get as many live calls with high value relevant personas so that we can give them an assumptive formality and enter the funnel? That's what we're going to be going into next. Smart targeting and personalization. So the easiest, most simple way I can explain this is you want to batch your buyers. So create lists by persona, industry, and or market segment. It can be employee count, it can be revenue growth, whatever the key buying triggers are for your solution or different solutions. Identify the top ones, start with your bread and butter first, and then batch your buyers, which is essentially filtering leads that have homogeneous priorities, challenges, and pain points, because we can then create scripts and or templates that are tailored for each of these lists. So your script, again, this works for cold calling, but it also works for emailing. Your script should ultimately be targeted enough, like that HR retail example, so that it can be a hyper relevant value statement for every lead on that particular list without needing to do research in between cold calls. Ideally, that VP of HR retail template would be a relevant template. I can be confident in that whenever I get a prospect that says hello that's on that list. And then we want to design messaging that's going to help us be targeted at scale. So it's simple, easy, and repeatable. As you can see where I highlighted words on that previous value statement script, that's what I changed. The rest largely stayed the same, so that you should then be able to easily pick up the phone only knowing their name, their company name, and their job title, and that should be all you need in order to make a dial. You don't need to know anything about like specific priorities about their company, their LinkedIn bio to make an effective cold call. It can be a nice cherry on top, especially if you have more strategic accounts you're targeting. Then it's like, okay, maybe you set those aside and do a little bit of extra research. But for just broad, high volume cold calling, you do not need to know this stuff, and usually it just slows you down and actually hurts your results rather than helps. So here's an example. I've used this one in the past on my channel of what this can look like. If you sell financial management software, that can include a whole bunch of different products that are relevant to a whole bunch of different personas that all work within the finance department but have slightly different priorities and challenges that they focus and face on a daily basis. So you could have lists of CFOs, VPs of financial planning and analysis, a VP of tax, controllers, treasurers, financial analysts. They're all similar, but you want to tweak the messaging to be more specific to each one of these individual personas. Even from there, you might have some top industries that you target. So financial services, healthcare, CPG. And then under that, you don't want to just look at financial services. You can look at insurance accounts, banking accounts, wealth management for healthcare, life science, med equipment, hospitals, etc. You could also look at market segment if you want. Leads that work at companies over 100 million in revenue, or leads that work at companies over 1,000 employees. You don't need to do all of these if they're not all relevant buying triggers, and there's way more than this. But then you can segment. So in this example, we'll look at a VP of FP&A that works specifically in the life science space and compare like what a general template would look like to this person versus smart targeting or smart personalization. So again, using the same framework, this is what a general VP of finance template can look like. And don't get me wrong, this can and will work if you deliver it confidently. This is where you should start. Create your general template for that title, and then you can branch off into more industry specific ones over time. So, hey John, this is Connor Murray calling from Capital Site. How are you? I just made up the company. Good, yeah. The reason I'm reaching out is because I'm part of our financial applications team that supports organizations like ABC Company. And we focus on priorities related to budgeting, forecasting, and financial reporting, usually by working with finance teams to unify data across platforms and then ultimately improve visibility for better decision making, usually through finding opportunities for automation and AI-driven workflows. So I'll be your main point of contact here for any priorities you do have in these areas going forward, resources you may need, anything like that. And then you can either pause or go for the time. So this is pretty good. You could call most VPs of finance, and that's going to be a relevant script for them and can be a good starting point if you deliver it confidently. But let's say life science is a really important industry that you go after. 1/3 of your accounts in your territory are in the life science space. Then it's worth taking your top titles and making an industry-specific version of it, following the same framework, but just replacing what I highlighted here to be more targeted for a VP of finance, specifically in life science. We're going to name priorities that are more relevant to the life science space, and this is going to increase the probability that this resonates with them in their head and they decide that this is worth a meeting just by a little bit, just by the margin. There's lots of people who, whether you delivered either of these confidently, they would have taken the meeting or would not have taken the meeting, but there's a small percentage of people who will take the meeting. They don't realize it, but it's because you made it more targeted for their space, and small percentages lead to massive differences at scale. So, hey John, this is Connor Murray calling from Capital Site. How are you? Good, yeah, the reason I'm reaching out is I'm part of the financial applications team here that supports life science organizations like ABC Company. And we focus on priorities related to clinical trial planning, budget forecasting, and commercialization, usually by working with finance teams to unify a lot of their scattered data from clinical trials and then accelerate the portfolio planning process, usually through finding opportunities for automation and AI-driven workflows. So I'll be your main point of contact here for any priorities you have in these areas going forward, trial data workflows, portfolio planning initiatives, anything like that. So I kept the script mostly the same, but just by replacing, instead of planning, I said clinical trial planning or commercialization, because a lot of these life science companies, they do $0 of revenue, they get a phase 3 drug trial approval, and then all of a sudden they're going global and are expecting to do hundreds of millions of revenue over the next 3 to 5 years, and they have to commercialize quick. So I'm naming priorities, scatter data from clinical trials, accelerate the portfolio planning process, rather than just broad general finance terms. And this is how you can coil the spring and do the heavy lifting up front. So now you could add 100, 300, 500 VPs of finance that work in a life science account to your list, and be confident that this is a script that you can deliver to all of them, and it's going to sound very, very relevant. You want to be tweaking and optimizing these throughout the year, but you need a starting point, and it's worth doing even though it takes a little heavy lifting up front. So another way to do this, as you build out a daily cold call engine, which really just looks like having your lists all of those lists of top ICPs, top personas you go after, the industries they work in, you have all of those lists made, you have all of the scripts that are associated with those lists. Now you want to reverse engineer what you normally need to do when you make cold calls as you're building this out. So normally, just think about it. What you need to do is you need to pick specific accounts or leads to contact. You sit down and you're like, who am I going to contact today? Then you need to add them to a list in your CRM. Then you need to think or come up with a talk track that you're going to say to them. You're probably going to end up pulling up their LinkedIn or their company website to personalize it in between every dial. This creates daily friction and it negatively impacts both your productivity. It makes it harder to make more dials and it makes the dials worse. And then it impacts your motivation too. I know we talked about that earlier in the video, but cold calling sucks when you're having to do this stuff. And I'm here to tell you, you don't need to do this stuff. So why not take the time to complete these activities for yourself up front so that you can just focus on execution? You want to know what you'll be doing every day when you sit down rather than having to come up with what to do. I'm telling you, if you're an SDR or an AE and pipeline generation feels tough, this is why. It's probably because you're creating friction for yourself and coming up with what to do each day. The job doesn't feel easy and frictionless and like a game until you make this distinction and you figure this out for yourself. You have everything laid out and you can just focus on execution. The analogy I always use is it's like meal prep. If you've ever followed a workout routine, a lot of people swear that it's more efficient to just spend 3-4 hours on Sunday getting your groceries, cooking them, packaging them up, and you'll have better workouts. You have less to worry about in the middle of the week. Your macros are on point rather than if you were trying to get food every day, cook it up. Things come up, you get busy, so you skip out a little bit. The same thing happens with cold calling. So you want to set yourself up, coil the spring, and you want to create lists that fit your best ICPs and your buying triggers first. So like I was saying, buying triggers can be a specific job title, it can be a department, it can be an industry, market segment, employee count, and what you really need in order to execute on this are 3 simple capabilities. We're going to talk about tech stack later in this video, but you're going to filter leads. You need the ability to filter leads by job title, or any of this criteria you're looking for, add them to lists, and then be able to contact them one by one via the phone. Lots of fancy tools out there. If you can do these 3 things, you can implement this framework at scale. So you need to be able to add filter leads by VPs of marketing that work in retail, digital marketers that work in banking, VPs of sales, and have all of these different lists so that you can create different value statements for all of these people. And you can now create a repeatable script that will be highly targeted for every person on that list, no matter how big it is. So to put it in the simplest of terms, we need to make a lot of dials, cold call during times of day prospects are most likely to answer, and then convert as many live calls to meetings as you can. We want to enter that value statement framework as frequently as we can. So here's another way to think about it. If you were going to dedicate a day to cold calling, I know this isn't always realistic. A lot of times you have meetings you've already set or internal meetings you have to attend to, especially if you work for a corporation. There's usually a lot of internal meetings they throw on your calendar, which are kind of annoying, but you just got to deal with them. But you can take time zones into account too, because this helps with answer rates so that you can deliver more assumptive formalities and get into the value statement more frequently. So the best time of day to cold call on paper from what the data shows is early in the morning, like 8 to 9:30, whatever their time is, or end of day, like 4 to 5 or even 4 to 6. It's okay to go an hour after 5 because these are generally the times of day people aren't in meetings yet. They're not in the flow of their day-to-day. They're generally a little more likely, the keyword is a little more likely to answer the phone. But don't stress if you can't call at these times of day. But if you lived on the East Coast in the United States, for example, you were dedicating a day to cold calling, you could cold call your East Coast accounts for the first hour and a half of the day, cold call your Central Time because for them, it's going to be early morning for them, and then cold call your Pacific Coast accounts later in the morning, 11 to 12:30. And then later in the day, you can cold call your East Coast accounts from 4 to 5:30. This is if you're in grind mode. I'm not saying you have to do this. 5:30 to 7 Central Time, 7 to 8:30 Pacific Time. And you're giving yourself the best chance of increasing your answer rate when you do that. So what you need in order to execute on this and build a cold call engine for yourself is you need to have your targeted list built out in advance. Job title, industry, geography, whatever those triggers are. You need to have your cold call scripts and value statements, again, built out in advance. You need to have your scheduled call blocks where you're prepared in advance which lists you're going to be calling and have the value statements ready to go. You just need to sit down, again, knowing what to do rather than having to come up with what to do. And then you need to dial without hesitation and skip the research between calls. If you do these 4 simple things, I say simple, it takes some heavy lifting to get it set up, but you're gonna have to do the heavy lifting regardless, and it's gonna be a lot less of a heavy lift if you just do it all at once like you would meal prep rather than doing it on a day-by-day basis. You will see your cold call results explode if you do these 4 things. I can nearly guarantee that. So when it comes to optimizing this process, you don't just want to be doing it and not measuring things. You don't need to be some sort of statistical savant and measure every single cold call you do and everything that happens. You really just need to measure your call volume, your answer rate, and your set rate. Those are 3 metrics you should know, and it's going to tell you the why behind your results, so that if you're not getting the results you want, is it because I just wasn't making as many calls? Hey, I just have my answer rate's been way lower recently for some reason. Let's look at that. Or if it's a set rate problem, that's the big one, the big hurdle to usually overcome is how can you increase your set rate? But at least you can identify certain areas and the bottlenecks and what you can do to improve. So with call volume, the problem is typically you're not organized, you're doing too much pre-dial research, you have no repeatable cold call structure in place, so you're having to come up with what to say on every cold call. Your calls take too long. I put voicemails there because I know there's lots of opinions out there. That's the reason I don't leave voicemails, because I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. I don't get enough meetings from them to justify how much they slow me down from making more dials. And then just daily friction in general. So the solution, coil the spring, batch your personas in lists, create the value statements for them, time block. I won't get too into this, but dialers can also help. I don't use them personally, but I have nothing against them. They can be a kind of a no-brainer for a lot of people in terms of efficiency. And then when it comes to answer rates, it can often just be a lack of consistency if you're not calling on a regular basis, calling at random times. What's important is that you just make the dials, but ideally you can take time zones into account so that you're increasing your probability of getting a better answer rate. So the solution, adhering to a consistent call block process, having strategic call blocks based on time zones, calling direct and mobile numbers if you can. People are more likely to answer here than on their company lines. It's just a fact. That also helps with call volume if you're not having to deal with, we need the 4-digit code in between every single dial. So that's twofold. And then set rates, which is kind of a beast of a bottleneck because it's essentially like becoming better on the phone. But if I had to break it down, focus on your tonality and your pacing. You want that confident downward inflecting tone rather than the passive upward inflecting tone. Passive language, which sounds like, would you maybe be interested next week if you have time or if you're interested, rather than saying, I'm looking to set some time next week, or yeah, let's set some time next week. Slight changes like that, that's the quickest path to getting better results from my experience, is just fixing your tonality and passive language, replacing it with stronger, more confident, assumptive language. Lack of structure and direction, so leading off with open-ended questions and creating too much variance for yourself so that it's hard to pull it and reel the call back into setting a meeting. That's why I prefer to use a repeatable structure, who you are, why you're calling, what you want, so I know what I'm doing on every cold call. And then asking too many questions in general. It's okay to ask them, but you got to deliver value first. You generally want to be direct and go for the meeting. When it comes to reviewing, and you need to be doing this, listening to your calls, you want some areas to evaluate. How long is your value statement? A lot of people either go too long, like 45 seconds plus, or not enough, where it's like 15 seconds and all they say is, hey, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. I support you regarding financial applications. I'm looking to meet next week on Friday. Do you have availability? Like, you're not giving them enough there. It needs to be about 30 to 35 seconds. Watch out for those upward inflections, and then watch out for passive language, as I've been saying, and then watch out for where you introduce variance. You can almost identify on the call where you gave the prospect an opportunity to give a defensive tone or to pull it away from what you want unnecessarily. These are the 4 most high impact areas I think you can focus on when it comes to reviewing game tape and actually listening to your calls and identifying areas to improve. So on that note, when it comes to implementing some of this and reviewing game tape, I want to talk about cold call tech stacks, what you actually need versus what's fluff. So I covered it a little bit earlier. Here is what you need, in my opinion, is an accurate enough B2B contact database. So I say enough because there's no silver bullet, just because you're always going to get wrong numbers. A lot of people, they get 2 wrong numbers in a row and they're like, I need a new system, I need to get a new vendor. And it's like, not necessarily. Like, no data is perfect. As long as it's accurate enough, you're good. And accurate enough can be 75% of the time. Like, you're gonna get a lot of wrong numbers. That's okay. You need the ability to filter leads by desired criteria, as we've talked about, and then you need the ability to add these filter leads to lists and contact them one by one via the phone and ideally email. So some examples that do one or all of these things: there's Apollo.io, Lucia, LinkedIn Sales Nav is good for accurate information. It's obviously missing phone numbers and emails, but you can usually get a plugin like Zoom Info. This is going to change depending, hopefully your company just has tools that do this, but this is going to change depending on whether you cold call on your own or you work for a corporation. But just know, this is all you need: accurate enough database, ability to filter leads, ability to add them lists and contact them. And then new development that I say is basically mandatory at this point is AI assistance, ChatGPT Plus or Enterprise. Hopefully your company pays for it again, but if not, it's the best $20 per month that you can spend. It can really help with territory planning. It can help you with creating these value statements too. It's never a fully ready to go out of the box, but it can get you 80% of the way there if you just give it your title, the title you're reaching out to, industry, etc. Now, some ones that are nice to have, but not totally necessary: if you have official call recording tools like Gong or Chorus, that's ideal. But you can, even just listening on the voice memos app of your phone is still very useful for hearing, did I use an upward inflection? Did I take too long with my value statement? Did I introduce variance? So sequencing and outreach tools, this is more for email. And then power dialers. So again, some tools that have this available: Apollo, Nooks, Phone Burner, Just Dial. They can really help with the call volume and getting more answers and giving yourself more shots on net, but it's not totally mandatory. You can make 100+ dials a day manually without using power dialers. And then tools that you don't need are tools that LinkedIn influencers are being paid to promote, the ones where you see either sponsored, or a lot of times they're not sponsored on LinkedIn, but you can just clearly see in the post they got paid to use it. Don't feel like you're missing out just because you don't have every single tool that LinkedIn sales influencers peddle. You only need these 3 things. Everything else is just added noise. You don't need fancy AI prospecting tools, and you don't need expensive CRM add-ons. You just need the basics. You can track a lot of this stuff like answer rate, set rate, call volume in a simple spreadsheet. I actually created one in Cold Call Mastery for people to download in the community, and lots of people take it and they make it fancy, but you don't need anything fancy to track this stuff. So on that note, I hope you got value out of this video. I know it was long, but I tried to really focus on the areas that are high impact, that are easy to implement, and that I've just seen repeatedly work, not just for myself, but hundreds of reps that I've coached over the years. If you did get value, there's a link in the description below for Cold Call Mastery where I go a lot more in depth on this. Again, I leave the live calls in there and can give you more hands-on help actually implementing and creating these scripts. A lot of times it's just the little details you need a second look at that can be the difference from going or feeling uncomfortable to very comfortable on every cold call. So hope to see you all in there. But with that, appreciate you all being here. Appreciate all the support, and I will see you all on the next one.